Three-act structure, a blueprint for your novel. Three-act structure is a common story framework used in novels that provide a clear and effective way to organize a story. It divides the plot into three main sections: the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. This setup introduces the characters, the setting, and conflict, and establishes the foundation for the story. The confrontation builds tension and stakes as the characters face challenges and obstacles. Finally, the resolution brings the story to a satisfying conclusion, resolving the conflict and tying up loose ends. By following this structure, authors can create a well-paced and engaging story that keeps readers invested from beginning to end. What is a three-act structure? The three-act structure divides a story into three distinct parts. Act 1, the setup. Act 2, the confrontation, and Act 3, the resolution. This structure provides an easy way to hold the main points of the story in your head in a coherent flow. It also allows you to communicate these points to industry professionals, agents, editors, or publishers in a format they are often expecting. Using this three-act structure is not mandatory, but it is so commonly used in storytelling that mastering it is helpful for any writer, regardless of their genre or audience. Act 1, the setup. In the first act, you introduce the world, the characters, and most importantly, the conflict that drives the story. This is where you establish the stakes and give readers a reason to care about what happens next. The setup typically includes a few key elements, including the hook. The opening scene should grab your reader's attention. It might showcase an exciting event, a mystery, or simply something that immerses readers in an intriguing way. Inciting incident, the event that sets the story in motion. This incident disrupts the protagonist's normal life and presents them with a challenge or a choice. Establishing the stakes. Here, you clarify what the protagonist stands to lose or gain, and set the foundation for the emotional journey ahead. At the end of Act 1, there is usually a turning point called the first plot point, where the protagonist is thrust into the story's primary conflict, often taking their first steps into an unknown and challenging situation. Act 2, the confrontation. Act 2 is the longest section of the story and is often referred to as the meat of the novel. This is where your protagonist faces a series of escalating obstacles and challenges. Here is what this act typically includes. Rising action. The protagonist encounters difficulties, makes mistakes, and struggles to find solutions to the conflict introduced in Act 1. Each obstacle raises the stakes higher and pushes the character into new territory. Character development. In this act, characters grow, learn, and change. The protagonist's internal journey is just as important as the external conflict. Readers will be emotionally invested in their success or failure. Midpoint. Roughly in the middle of Act 2, there is a critical event, often referred to as the midpoint, where something significant shifts. This could be a revelation, a major victory, or a failure, but it alters the direction of the story and propels the protagonist toward their final challenge. The low point. Toward the end of Act 2, the protagonist experiences their darkest moment, also known as the crisis. At this stage, everything seems lost, and the protagonist must confront their deepest fears and or limitations. Act 3, the resolution. Act 3 brings the story to its climax and resolution. The protagonist faces the central conflict head-on, and the story reaches its emotional and narrative peak. Here is what happens. The climax. This is the ultimate confrontation where the protagonist either achieves their goal or fails spectacularly. It's the highest point of tension in the story, where the stakes are at their peak. Falling action. After the climax, the story begins to wind down. The protagonist deals with the consequences of their actions, whether good or bad. And resolution. Finally, loose ends are tied up and the story reaches its conclusion. The resolution shows how the protagonist has changed or grown because of the events they experienced. It gives the reader a sense of closure, even if every question isn't fully answered. Why use the three-act structure? The first reason is clarity. The three-act structure gives a writer a clear roadmap to follow and makes it easier to plan and organize your novel. It helps you break down a complex story into manageable chunks. The second reason is expectations. Publishers, editors, and agents are familiar with this structure, which makes it easier for you to pitch your novel. They expect to see a story that flows naturally and builds toward a satisfying conclusion. The third reason is emotional engagement. The three-act structure naturally builds attention and keeps readers emotionally engaged. Each act serves a purpose in drawing readers deeper in the story, and that ensures they remain invested from beginning to end. There are other structures for novel. The three-act structure is a widely used and effective framework for novels, but it's essential to remember that it's not the only option. Other popular story structures include, for example, the hero's journey. This classic structure guides the protagonist through a series of trials and tribulations to achieve their goal. Four-act structure. This structure divides the story into four distinct acts, allowing for more complex plot lines and character development. And also, you can experiment with frameworks. For more experienced writers, experimenting with unconventional structures can lead to innovative and unique storytelling. However, the three-act structure's popularity comes from its proven effectiveness, especially for the new writers. Its straightforward and easily understandable format provides a solid foundation upon which to build a compelling story. By understanding and applying the three-act structure, writers can create stories that engage readers and achieve their goal of novel success. How to write a three-act structure for your novel. Writing a novel using the three-act structure begins with breaking your story into its fundamental components: the setup, the confrontation, and the resolution. Each act has a distinct role to play in the overall flow of the story. Here we have a step-by-step guide to how to write each act effectively. Writing Act 1, the setup. Start by introducing the main elements of your story: the protagonist, the world they inhabit, and the central conflict. Introduce your protagonist. Give readers a clear sense of who your main character is. Show their goals, desires, and the status quo of their life before the conflict begins. Establish the world, if it's a realistic setting or a fantasy world. You should give readers enough details to feel grounded in the environment. Show them the rules of the world and what's at stake. Inciting incident. Early in Act 1, introduce the event that disrupts the protagonist's life. This incident should set the story in motion by presenting a problem or opportunity that forces the character to act. First plot point. Conclude Act 1 by having the protagonist make a decision or face a situation that propels them into the central conflict of the story. This is where they leave their old life behind and step into the unknown. Don't overload your readers with too much information in the beginning. Focus on creating a hook that grabs their attention and gets them invested in your protagonist's journey through the story. Writing Act 2, the confrontation. Act 2 is all about rising action, challenges, and growth. It's the longest part of the story, where the protagonist encounters obstacles, both external and internal. Build conflict. Present your protagonist with a series of escalating obstacles. They can be physical, emotional, or psychological, that increase the stakes and push the character out of their comfort zone. Midpoint. Halfway through Act 2, introduce a significant event that shifts the story's direction. This could be a revelation, a major decision, or a turning point that raises the stakes even higher. The midpoint often forces the protagonist to change their approach to solving the problem. Character growth. Through Act 2, show how your protagonist evolves. They should learn from their mistakes, face their fears, and make decisions that reflect their growing understanding of the conflict. And finally, crisis or low point. As you approach the end of Act 2, your protagonist hits their lowest point. This crisis could be a major failure, a betrayal, or a moment of self-doubt where it seems like all hope is lost. Keep the tension high by continuously challenging your protagonist. The obstacles they face should feel increasingly difficult, building suspense and keeping readers on the edge. And finally, writing Act 3, the resolution. In Act 3, everything comes to a head. This is where the protagonist confronts the final challenge and the story reaches its climax. The climax. The climax is the high point of your story, where the protagonist faces the central conflict directly. This confrontation should be intense and decisive, that resolves the story's primary tension. Whether the protagonist win or lose, this moment should feel inevitable based on the choices and growth they have experienced. Following action. After the climax, they take some time to show the immediate consequences of the protagonist's actions. This is where you start to wrap up loose ends and show the protagonist's world as has changed as a result of the events. Final resolution. Bring your story to a satisfying close. The resolution shows how the protagonist has transformed, and it provides closure to any remaining plot threads. You can hint the future possibilities, but the primary conflict should feel resolved. The climax should feel like the culmination of everything your protagonist has gone through. Make sure the emotional payoff is strong and reflects the themes of your novel. The three-act structure isn't a rigid rule book. However, its simplicity and proven effectiveness make it a valuable asset for novelists. By understanding and applying this framework, you provide yourself with a solid foundation for writing an engaging and coherent story. You can follow it strictly or use it as a flexible guide. The three-act structure can help you navigate the complexities of storytelling and create a novel that connects with readers and impress industry professionals.